My daughter called me on a Tuesday morning in October while I was sitting at my kitchen table in Sudbury with a cup of tea going cold beside me, and the first thing she said wasn't hello. Mom, I need you to know I did what I had to do. I transferred the money from your savings account, all of it, and I put the house up for sale last week. The listing went live this morning. I'm sorry, but we needed it. I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked out the window at the birch trees in the backyard, the ones my husband planted the summer before our youngest was born. The leaves were already turning. Okay, I said. She seemed thrown off by that. There was a pause. Okay, that's all you're going to say? Have a good day, sweetheart. I hung up, and then I sat there with my cold tea, and I almost smiled, because my daughter had just told me she'd stolen everything I had, and she had absolutely no idea that she hadn't. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what happened, because none of this makes sense without knowing where I started. My name is Harriet. I'm 67 years old. I was a registered nurse for 31 years, mostly at Health Sciences North up here in Sudbury, mostly in the cardiac unit. I retired at 62, not because I wanted to, but because my knees had other plans. I have 2 children. My son lives in Kelowna with his wife and their 2 boys, and we talk on the phone every Sunday without fail. My daughter lives 40 minutes away in Hanmer, and for the last 3 years, I have barely slept a full night thinking about her. Her name is Renata. She is 41 years old. She has her father's green eyes and my stubbornness, and somewhere along the way, I have turned this over so many times, I've worn grooves in my thinking. She became someone I didn't recognize. My husband, Frank, died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, which is the kind that doesn't give you much time to argue with it. We had 8 months from diagnosis to the end, and I will tell you honestly that those 8 months were both the worst of my life and some of the most honest. Frank and I had been married for 39 years. We met at a dance in Capriol in 1983 when I was 20 and he was 23, and he stepped on my feet twice and apologized so sincerely both times that I agreed to dance with him a 3rd time. That was Frank. He was the kind of man who apologized when he was wrong and meant it. When he died, he left me the house, paid off, bought in 1991 for $147,000, worth considerably more now, and his pension from the mine, and a modest RRSP that I'd been adding to my own savings over the years. Not wealthy, comfortable. The kind of comfortable that takes 30 years of careful living to build. I was not naive about money. I was a nurse. I had seen what happened to women my age who handed things over to people they trusted. I had sat with patients whose children had cleaned out their accounts, and I had watched those women try to hold their dignity while the foundation under them cracked. I told myself I would never be one of those women. And then grief does things to you that you cannot predict. About 8 months after Frank died, Renata started coming around more. I should have been grateful. My son was across the country, and I was rattling around in a 4-bedroom house by myself, eating toast for dinner and watching the news too late at night. When Renata started dropping by on weekends, bringing her husband Bryce, I thought it was kindness. I thought she was finally stepping up. Bryce! I need to tell you about Bryce. He was polite, in the way that a man is polite. When he wants something, he always brought wine. He always complimented the house, the high ceilings, the original hardwood floors, the size, the quiet street. He would walk through my kitchen with his eyes doing calculations. I couldn't quite see, and I noticed it, but I told myself I was being uncharitable. This was my son-in-law. He was trying. What I didn't know, what Renata hadn't told me, was that Bryce had been let go from his position at the engineering firm in Sudbury 14 months earlier. What I didn't know was that they had refinanced their house twice and were now in a position where the payments were no longer manageable. What I didn't know was that Bryce had approached 3 different family members on his side for help and been turned down by all of them. I found all of this out much later. What Renata told me over the course of several careful conversations that fall was that they were going through a transition period. That Bryce had some exciting prospects, that things were tight but manageable. She talked the way people talk when they're laying groundwork. Then one Sunday in December, she sat across from me at this same kitchen table and she asked if I had ever thought about making her a co-signatory on my accounts. Just to make things easier, she said, case something happened to me. She mentioned a woman at her office whose mother had had a stroke and the family couldn't access anything for months while it went through probate. It was a reasonable story. It touched on exactly the right fear. I am 63 years old, she said. You live alone. Don't you want to know someone can help if there's an emergency? I said I'd think about it. And here is the part I am not proud of. I did it. 3 weeks later, in January, I went to my bank and I added Renata's name to my checking account and my savings account. Not because I was foolish, because I was lonely and I missed Frank and she was my daughter and I wanted to believe she was asking because she loved me. I want to be honest about that. I made a choice. I was not tricked so much as I was willing to be reassured. Things changed slowly, and then all at once, the way things do. By spring, Renata was calling more often, but the calls had a different texture. She'd ask questions about the house, what I'd paid for it, whether I'd had an appraisal recently, whether I'd thought about downsizing. She'd mention condos in a casual voice, the kind of casual that isn't casual at all. She told me twice that the market was strong right now, that a house like mine in this neighborhood would sell in days. I started keeping a notebook. I'm not sure exactly when I started, but I remember writing the date at the top of the first page. April 14th. I wrote down what she said and when she said it. Nursing trains you to document. It's a reflex. In June, Bryce came alone one evening, which had never happened before. He sat in my living room and he talked for a long time about a business opportunity, something to do with industrial equipment leasing in Northern Ontario, and about how all he needed was seed capital to get started. He said seed capital. He said it was low risk. He said he expected returns within 18 months. He asked me if I would consider a family loan. I told him I'd need to think about it. He pushed, gently, the way he did everything. He mentioned Renata's stress. He mentioned how hard things had been. He mentioned that family was supposed to help family. He sat in Frank's chair and he mentioned family 4 times in one conversation, and I counted everyone. I told him I'd get back to him. I called my son that same night. My son, who is steady in ways I have always been grateful for, listened to everything I said without interrupting. Then he said, Mom, call the bank tomorrow and call Ted. Ted is my lawyer. He has been my lawyer since 1997. He is 71 years old and he golfs badly and he doesn't waste words. I called him the next morning. What Ted told me took about 40 minutes and changed everything. He asked me about the counts, the house, the conversation with Bryce. He asked questions in the quiet, methodical way he has, and he didn't seem alarmed, which I found both reassuring and slightly terrifying. At the end, he said, Harriet, I think we should move the house into a trust. He explained what that meant. A family trust, specifically a Henson Trust, which is a legal structure in Canada often used to protect assets. He explained that once the house was held in trust with a trustee other than me and other than Renata, it could not be sold without the consent of the trustee. It would not be subject to my accounts. It would not be accessible through any power of attorney unless specifically named. I asked him who should be the trustee. He suggested my son, but said it could also be a professional trustee if I preferred. I chose my son. We called him together that afternoon and explained everything, and my son agreed without hesitation. He took the afternoon off work to deal with the paperwork. Ted filed everything within 3 weeks. Then we did something else. I removed Renata's name from my savings account and moved the majority of my money into a new account she had no access to. I left a small amount, about $4,000, in the old account, enough to look unchanged, not enough to matter. I didn't tell Renata any of this. I want you to understand something. I didn't do this because I had given up on my daughter. I did it because I had not. I wanted there to be something left to salvage when this was over. And I knew, the way you know things about your own children, that it wasn't going to be over without something breaking first. The call came on that Tuesday in October. After I hung up, I sat for a few minutes, and then I called Ted. I read him my notes from the notebook. He was quiet through most of it, and then he said, "Call the bank, confirm the transfer, and then call the non-emergency police line and make a report." Not because it was going to lead anywhere today, he said, but because documentation matters and I would want a record. I did exactly that. The bank confirmed that Renata had transferred $4,200 from the original savings account, the one I'd left the small amount in, to an external account registered to Bryce. $4,200. Not nothing, but not the $43,000 she thought was there. I made the police report. The officer who took my call was a young woman who sounded like she was taking careful notes, and at the end she said, "Mrs. Harriet, do you want us to contact your daughter?" I said, "Not yet." I said I needed to make a phone call first. I called my son. "She did it," I said. He exhaled slowly. "What do you want to do?" "I want to let her try to sell the house first." He understood what I meant. He's known me a long time. 48 hours later, Renata called me again. The tone was different this time. It was the tone of someone who has run into a wall they did not know was there. "Mom." Her voice was tight. "I need you to explain something to me." "Of course, sweetheart." I called an agent. She looked up the property records. The house is in a trust. Why is the house in a trust? I let a moment pass. Because I put it there. When? A few months ago. Why didn't you tell me? And here is where I had to be careful. Because I had rehearsed this, actually, not the exact words, but the feeling I wanted to carry. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Something quieter than both of those. "I didn't tell you," I said, "because I noticed what was happening, and I wanted to protect myself, and I wanted to give you a chance to stop before it went too far." Silence. "Renata, you took $4,000 from my account. You tried to list a house that you had no legal right to sell. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" More silence. And then something I hadn't entirely expected. She started to cry. Not the performed crying that I had heard from her before in arguments, the kind meant to redirect. This was different, ragged, the kind of crying that means something has cracked open. "He told me it was going to work," she said. "He told me it was our only option. He said you'd understand that we'd pay you back, that it was temporary. Mom, he told me. Stop, I said. She stopped. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I need you to tell me the truth about the money. How much debt are you in? Where Bryce actually spent it. All of it. It took her 2 hours to tell me the full story. I sat at my kitchen table and I listened and I wrote it down in my notebook. The refinancing, the job loss, the debt to Bryce's cousin, the money he had borrowed from a colleague and not paid back, the line of credit that had been maxed since the previous spring. It was worse than I'd imagined and exactly as bad as I'd feared. When she finished, I asked her one question. Did you know he was going to take money from my account specifically? A long pause. He said it would just be a bridge, that we'd have it back in your account before you noticed. That's not what I asked. Another pause. Yes, she said very quietly. I knew. I let that sit between us for a moment. Okay, I said. Here's what's going to happen. I want to be clear that what happened next was not simple and was not clean, and anyone who tells you that these situations resolve neatly is selling you something. The police report stayed open. Ted sent Renata and Bryce a formal demand letter for the return of the $4,200, which I knew we were unlikely to collect given the state of their finances, but which needed to exist on paper. The attempted sale of the house could not proceed. The listing was taken down the same day. The agent confirmed the trust, but we had it on record. Bryce, to no one's surprise, disappeared from the situation almost entirely. He did not call me. He did not write. He had Renata make every communication, and then he stepped back from the consequences of every decision he had pushed her toward. I have nothing more to say about him, except that I hope my daughter eventually saw that clearly. My son flew in from Kelowna. He stayed for 10 days. He took Renata to see a credit counselor that he'd found, a woman who worked with a non-profit out of Sudbury, and did not charge Renata for the first consultation. He sat with her through the initial meeting. He did not yell at her. He did not lecture her. He looked at the numbers with her and helped her understand that it was survivable, that she had options, that the situation was bad but not beyond repair. I did not go to that meeting. I stayed home. I did the dishes and I planted the last of my fall bulbs. And I thought about Frank, who had a talent for forgiving people without diminishing himself in the process, and I tried to figure out how to do the same. Renata came to the house a week after my son arrived. She stood on the front porch in the November cold, and she didn't have wine, and she didn't have an agenda. She just stood there in her coat and asked if she could come in. I said yes. We sat in the kitchen. She didn't try to explain or minimize. She said she was sorry. She said it wasn't enough. But she didn't know what else to start with. She said she had been afraid, and she had let that fear make her someone she didn't want to be. I said, I know. I said, I'm angry. I want you to know that. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. She nodded. And I'm also your mother. Those two things are both true at the same time. She cried again. And this time I let myself cry a little too, which I hadn't let myself do through any of this. It's a strange thing to grieve your daughter while she's sitting right across from you. But that's what I was doing. I was grieving the version of this that didn't happen. The call she didn't make. To tell me they were in trouble. The conversation we could have had that would have been hard but would have been honest and would have left us on the same side. That's the part that broke my heart the most. Not the money, not the house. The fact that she hadn't trusted me enough to just tell me. It has been 8 months since that morning in October. Renata and Bryce separated in January. She moved into a small apartment in Sudbury. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, a building I know from driving past it for 20 years. She's working full-time at a medical billing office now, same job she left 3 years ago when Bryce decided she should stay home. She calls me on Tuesdays. We don't always have a lot to say, but we call. The $4,000 was repaid in installments. $200 a month, which is all she can manage, and I told her that was fine. It's not about the money. It never was about the money. The house is still in the trust. Ted says it's the sensible thing, and I agree with him. And if that seems cold to say, I don't mean it that way. I am 67 years old, and I live alone, and the house is the thing that will matter most when I'm gone. I have decided it will go to both my children equally in the trust documentation, and that this is not a punishment of Renata, but a structure that protects everyone, including her. My son came back in February for a long weekend. We went snowshoeing at Kiwi Park, which I had not done in years and which nearly killed me, but in the good way, the way that reminds you, your body still works. We made his father's spaghetti sauce on the Saturday night, and we talked about Frank for most of the evening, the way we have started to be able to do again. With warmth instead of just grief. I still have the notebook. I haven't decided what to do with it. Some days I think I'll shred it when this all feels finished. Other days I think I'll keep it, not as evidence, not as proof of anything, but as a record of a time when I had to be very deliberate about trusting myself. When I had to choose, very quietly, to protect the life I'd built, even from someone I loved. Frank used to say that love without limits isn't love, it's just permission. I used to push back on that. I thought it was too hard-edged, too transactional. I don't push back on it anymore. I don't think I won anything this past year. I don't think of it that way. I think I held the line. I think I kept the door open for my daughter while making sure she couldn't take the door off the hinges. And I think slowly we are both figuring out what comes next. My tea goes cold a lot. I've started just accepting that about myself. I put the kettle on and I get distracted by the birch trees or the news or the particular quality of light in the early morning in October in Northern Ontario, which is the kind of light that makes you feel like the world is made of something worth protecting. I still believe that. After everything, I still believe that.